Having been through the process of self-assessing against all of the elements of the standards, it's important then to step back and look more holistically, because the professional standards for teaching and leadership here in Wales are not really intended to be used in that granular way when you're considering your progress as a teacher. You need to look more widely, and so we have this step in the progress review called the synthesis of progress. So Emma, how do you start off with a synthesis of progress?
Okay, well, in the first instance, as Tom said, you will have self-assessed, and so you should have a fairly good handle on where your areas of strength are and where your perhaps areas for development that will take you through to the next progress review are going to lie, so your targets as it were. But the synthesis of progress is located, as you can see on my screen here, in the assessment tab of the PLP. Click on synthesis of progress, and you've got some guidance up top and some tables here that you will complete in order to get that synthesis of progress done. So step one, depending on which CAP point it is, which key assessment point it is to identify two elements, so P1, P2, P3, of the pedagogy standards. Okay, so 1 to 2 specific elements of the pedagogy cluster of elements that you feel you've made the most progress in since either the start of CP1, if it's your first progress review, or since your previous progress review. You're going to then follow the prompt questions in the synthesis of progress pro forma that you find on the PLP, and aim to sort of plan to address those before you write it. So you might want to do some sort of rough planning before you commit it to the PLP. So looking back now at the guidance you've got on the synthesis of progress on the PLP, it asks you to identify what progress have you made in the 2 selected, or 1 to 2 selected elements of pedagogy that you're going to discuss. Now, as I said, that they might have derived from your self-assessment judgments. Or you might have a bit of a hunch about this generally, because you know that you've been having regular feedback from your mentor in mentor meetings, they've done formal lesson observations of you, and you've had a lot of formative feedback in the Blue Book. And you might have a quick chat with your mentor and say, you know, I've got to write about these 1 to 2 elements of pedagogy where I've made the most significant progress. What do you think? So you're not alone in that, and there should be a number of different sort of forms of evidence, as it were, that will feed into your judgment there. So you need to identify them in this first column, but importantly, you need to explain how you know. How do you know that those are the 2 where the most significant progress and gains have been made? And of course there, you're not just thinking about how you've progressed as a teacher. You perhaps will also be talking about the impact that your teaching has had on learners. So you know, for example, that your differentiation strategies have improved because the outcomes for learners who need that extra support or extra challenge have actually significantly improved since your previous progress review, or since the start of CP1. So that first column is what are the 2 elements, and how do you know? And then the adjacent column is an interesting one. It speaks to what Tom just mentioned about the professional standards for teaching and leadership being integrated. So this column asks you to state how other elements of the 4 remaining areas of the standard, so collaboration, professional learning, innovation and leadership, how they helped you to improve those 2 elements of pedagogy. So you're going to have to do some thinking about this and have a look at the elements, look at what they involve. So for example, professional learning, there are particular elements that talk about the impact of research and wider reading. So did you do any research and wider reading that meant that you made significant gains in those elements of pedagogy? So you're going to have to do some thinking around that and identify which ones you're going to talk about. You'll do that, as you can see on my screen here, in this top table. So you just be keeping a running audit of which elements of the standards you've talked about at each progress review. And then you're in a position where you've got a clear idea, a much deeper reflection of where you made those gains, how the standards work together to help you get there, before you can move on to think about where you're going next.
And so having done that process of considering the integrated nature of the standards, the way that innovation, professional learning, collaboration and so on help you to move your pedagogy forward, and of course pedagogy is what we're here for, we're all here to be teachers. Hopefully the idea is that having identified that process, you're then able to apply that process to whatever your next steps are going to be.
Absolutely. So as you can expect, the final stage or the final stages of the synthesis of progress is to identify what your targets are and what elements of the standards apply to those targets. And it's telling you here, and if we go back to my screen here, you can see that it's urging you to select 3 to 4 of the most appropriate and relevant targets. And again, these might be targets that have come up again and again from your mentor that still stand. These might be gleaned from your self-assessment judgments. And you know, these elements must include pedagogy, because as Tom said, you know, pedagogy is paramount, but you might have some other elements of the other standards there as well that you might want to be working on too. So 3 to 4 you will list as your major targets. And then you've got the adjacent column, which is asking you how you can use the other elements of the standards to address those targets. So for example, coming back to my earlier example of differentiation, if differentiation is one of your targets, which other elements of the standards are you going to use and draw upon to help you make the improvements that you need to address those targets? So again, it's in that spirit of using the elements of the professional standards of teaching and leadership together in an integrated way to advance your practice. Worth mentioning that you are also asked in the synthesis of progress to reflect on any gains that you've made in the cross-curricular skills. So you're asked to comment on how effectively the cross-curricular skills of literacy, numeracy and digital competence and Welsh language have been developed in your pupils, and also how you yourself have worked to develop your skills in those important cross-curricular areas. And that will then put you in a position, having done your self-assessment judgments, having done your synthesis of progress, of being able to meet up with your mentor and have a very robust conversation about where you think you are, why you think you're there, and where you think you're going next.